Whenever you want to build a software product, you have to decide which technologies to use. Nowadays, there are millions of options out there. So how do you choose the right tech for your business? We'll find out in today's episode. Hi and welcome to Amp Up, a podcast by Amplifyre. I'm your host David and I'm joined by Kyle Bernhardy, the CTO of Harper DB. He has over 20 years of experience in the tech industry and is expert in cloud architecture, database architecture, as well as multiple programming languages. Welcome to the show, Kyle. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing good as well. I think it's a very nice day to have this talk about this very interesting and important topic.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So looking forward to hear a little bit about your insights on this topic. So yeah, as I said, there are gazillions of options out there to choosing technology, and very often companies, what I have seen in the past also very much, is that they choose a technology a little bit prematurely, or a lot prematurely actually, and then they get stuck with it and they don't know how to actually get out of this, how to change something. So why do you think this is happening? Why are companies choosing wrong technologies or technologies too fast?
I think there's a number of reasons. From my personal experience working in the startup space, startups especially, there is an urge to get something done. There's also, rightly so, the concept of failing fast. But like to your point, once you create something, it becomes legacy and it becomes a lot harder to pull something out. And early stage startups a lot of times in the tech space are engineering driven, and engineers are very much driven by results. I'm going to get something done. I want to prove out that I can help the business move forward. It's always an optimistic viewpoint coming from the best place. And a lot of times with startups, there's a lot of unknowns. There's an idea and you're building off of an idea, but the idea a lot of times is not proven out yet. Because that's a startup, is you're trying to build a business, build a product, build something. I also think in larger scale companies, there is a problem. It's probably based off of an existing legacy system, or you're trying to modernize, and you may have teams that are based off legacy, maybe don't have as much experience in whatever is quote unquote modern, and they're coming from a place of like, well, this seems like the right approach for the problem in front of us. Let's implement this. But I think a lot of times it's not fully understanding what's trying to be solved, what's trying to be created. And there's a number of reasons because of budget, time. You have to adapt to what's happening in front of you. It's never because of someone is not intelligent, someone is not, it's not out of anything that's malicious. It's always in best intention, but, you have to thread the needle on all these things, like between time, money, and delivering, because there's that old saying, perfect is the death of good. And so you have to also accomplish good enough in these scenarios too.
I think actually that it might be also a little bit, we all are living, or especially in the startup world, we're all living this agile mindset, or we're trying to live this agile mindset. And I think there's sometimes also a misconception there that people think, oh, I want to be agile, I want to be very fast, I want to break things fast. I don't actually care so much about the decisions, that they then think, okay, all the decisions that I make, actually they don't matter at all because I can change them. Well, but when it comes to technologies, actually that's not the case, right? We have written let's say some software with thousands and thousands of lines of code, and then I want to change it. Well, it's many months of work maybe then that this happens, right?
Yeah, I think there is also value. There is always value in, I wouldn't call it failing, but there is value in, I guess we can call it failure. Because you do learn what doesn't work so that you can move on to what will work better. But there are processes, I think, with what you and I can talk about, there are ways of quote unquote failing safely and creating pathways to success before, like you said, writing thousands of lines of production code that then there's time, human effort, and money that has to go in to unwind that and course correct to something that's going to be better. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Cool. Yeah, great. So Kyle, why do you think it's important to choose actually the right technology?
Ultimately, choosing the right technology, it's to support your business. If you're on the support side, the DevOps side, or the engineering side, choosing the right technology will ultimately make your life easier, because there's always plenty of challenges. But if the wrong technology is chosen, you're going to have to create a lot of shims around the gaps that were intrinsic to that technology that does not fit your use case. And whether that's performance, accessibility, integration, or just feature gaps for your user base, you'll have to build extra systems around that in order to accommodate what your business actually needs, which then turns into more work. It could create the need for a larger scale team than maybe you would have needed earlier, if a technology was chosen that was more streamlined into your business's workflow. It's obviously profit and money, but also making sure that your team can run as efficiently as possible.
And do you have some examples of in the past where a wrong technology was chosen in a production and it created some problems because of that?
Yeah, I have quite a few. What I would point to is like in Harper DB, very early on, and I'll try to make this as concise as possible, but when we started the company, we built our own data storage algorithm, and it worked for proving out Harper DB and our model. But we realized that we needed to move to a different data storage mechanism. And we had known this company. I won't name them because it would put them in a bad light, and the company is great. It just didn't work out for us. So we had been contacted by this other company. They had a key value store, and we had talked to them. They had shown us some benchmarks, and we were like, this looks great. And also we were in a situation where we really knew we needed to move on and adapt our product to a new data storage mechanism. Without doing our own due diligence, we just moved forward with it. We spent about $100,000, a lot of engineering time on top of paying them for their consulting time. It was their time and our time that was put into this. And without doing due diligence on our side, it wasn't until right before release where we started doing benchmarks, and we realized that this product was not going to work. It was actually, in a lot of cases, the benchmarks were worse than our existing data storage mechanism, and so we just had to scrap it. And that was about 5 months of time, 3 engineers full-time over that on our side. I think they had about the same amount on their end. We were out $100,000, which for a startup is a lot of money. Yeah, and we had to then, after that, readjust and figure out what are we going to do because this didn't work out. That's one story I have. And I just wanted to choose one that was very up in the forefront of my mind right now. That was a couple years ago, but that's the most recent one that we had. Yeah.
Sure. And I think actually many startups or many companies that actually went to several software projects can relate to this and have seen these situations. When somebody is just starting out building their first software product, then they might not even realize how important this decision is. And especially also the money character behind it. Yeah, that, sure, you learn when you fail. That's true. But at the end of the day, you spent a ton of money, and software development is extremely expensive, right? And as you said, like 100K, you just spent here on something that at the end of the day didn't work out. You had to throw it out. And the problem very often with software development is also that sometimes you are lucky and you can reuse the code, you can use it in some other situations, but very often, unfortunately, you can't. And you just have to throw it out the window. You can't do anything with it anymore, right? And this is just an important point, yeah.
Yeah, and there was one other Sorry to interrupt you. There was one other
Yeah.
aspect to that too, was we had also put some marketing effort into that. So there was not just the engineering time, there was marketing and business effort that was put into, because we were going to release and then we had to pull it all back. So there was a broader effort just beyond engineering that happened too. And from a business side, I had to talk to my business partner, or business partners, to explain what happened and how we got here. And it was a lot of uncomfortable conversations that, came through it. Yeah. Ultimately we ended up in a better place, but there was a few months that were, it was hard. It was very hard for us.
Yeah, I totally can relate to this, and I can tell you, I had also a similar situation actually once a few years back when we built another platform where with a software partner actually they decided to use an SQL database, right? I mean, very often when you use a database, you have always this question: okay, is it NoSQL or SQL that you want to use? And they chose SQL because they thought it would be more reliable, it would be better for the structure because the structure of the database is all set. But actually, to be honest, the database changed a lot later on, and then the whole system overloaded like extremely, like with thousands of different tables that were related to each other in very complicated ways. Nobody understood actually in the end how all this works, and then we found out that NoSQL would actually have been much better. And then I also found out that the reason why they chose SQL wasn't actually really because it was the best decision, but because of internal politics. Because their own developers were just more comfortable. Their own developers were just more comfortable with the SQL, and they could just handle it better, But then, what do you do, right? I mean, if you set up this whole wrong database system, then you actually have to build the whole product from scratch again, right? And so we also lost a ton of money actually doing this. And all learnings.
Yeah, and I mean, the database that's the pillar that things are built upon.
Yeah.
And when you've got that schema creep like that, and because they're trying to accommodate most likely performance losses, so they're scaling out tables because performance can't handle the scale that you are trying to get to. Create a real mess. I can envision in my head what was probably going on, and you being the end consumer, you're like caught in the turmoil of just what's happening. Like, it's probably for you, you're just trying to use a product or a product that's being built for you, and it's you're getting things like second or third hand and not fully understanding why things are the way they are. And I'm sure they're trying to accommodate you, I'm not thinking they're lying to you, but they're just trying to be like, oh, this isn't working, so let's adjust, and then until finally it's just untenable. It create really strained relationships with partners.
Definitely. It really makes this complicated. And then you're sitting there and thinking, okay, why is everything taking so long? Every little change in the code is extremely complicated, right? Just because you haven't seen the back behind of it. So, I mean, okay, so in the last years, while you have been working with so many different technologies and databases, etc., you have set up a framework, right, to realize what technologies to choose and when to choose them, and etc. Can you tell a little bit about this framework that you have created?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was all out of the example that I gave to you. Is we made a really critical error in how we basically chose a product that was just kind of in front of us. Someone showed up and said, hey, we can help you. And we said, thank God someone can help us. And we didn't verify anything on our end. We just felt like we were being thrown a life vest in the ocean, and we grabbed it. And in our case, it couldn't support our weight. It wasn't a bad life vest. We were just a little too heavy for that one. So the framework that we ended up creating was just up front, what are the goals for this, whatever new technology that we're trying to adapt? What are the requirements? What are we trying to get out of this? Also, what are the resources that we have that we can leverage to implement this new technology? And part of that is how many people, what competencies do they have? What's our budget? And that's really, like, from a resource perspective, we need to be able to make sure that internally we can support this technology. Like, as it's being chosen, is this going to be in a language that our engineers know? Is this going to be very, very complicated? If it's going to be really complicated, we may not have enough people to support it. Also, where are the edges around this? Like, so knowing that what workloads we need to push against this technology, making sure that this technology can handle the workloads that we're going to put against it, meeting customer needs. So all those things feed into expectations and requirements and goals that we need to hold, so that and this is really ultimately product vision, technological vision for this piece, and that vision will then drive into the rest of these choices as we go. And so then after that, it's looking at what technologies are out there. Like you said, there's thousands, millions of technologies, especially with open source. There's lots of options, but with the understanding of what are our goals, what are our requirements, what are our limitations from a resource perspective, what's going to start fitting into these buckets. And so you can very quickly start doing some evaluation and doing a really quick bake-off. So the way I always look at it is like, do a bake-off, eliminate broad swaths of the field, and then once you can come down to a few, start doing a very quick prototype out of project. So we're a software company, so typically what we do is we do something out of project that simulates workloads with these things and see how they hold up. So that's prototype phase, and then once we have determined maybe one or two at that point, doing something that's a rough POC in product. And so this is all about filtering out and really kind of failing, like we said earlier, failing in a safe way. Because all this code that we're writing the intention is this is all rough and dirty, and it's intended to be thrown away mostly, but still holding our goals in mind and doing something that's very rough to something a little bit more refined, and then gets a little bit more refined, still not production ready. But once the POC is done, we now have, with our goals in mind, what did we learn as we went through this? And we've done a POC, we now have an understanding of like, what's it going to take to implement this product so that we can now generate a path to production through that pattern. So that's really our framework that we've adapted that really works really well for us.
Wow, actually a pretty elaborate framework, I would say. I think I know very few companies that go so deep, right? So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And I will say, like, there's not always time for all that. So sometimes you have to choose some of these things, right? We also don't have time for all this always. For some of the very critical components, this is the process we take. So for very foundational, fundamental aspects, but there's other areas where we don't have the time. We also have determined that it's a little bit safer to not be as rigid and thorough in this process. And so we will take aspects of this and not all these components, but goals up front. If you've established goals and requirements, you can then still choose maybe just like, we got goals and we're going to do a POC and not do a bake off. We're just going to, we have goals, we have a good idea of what we want to do. We're going to do a POC, and then just that POC turns into production. So sometimes we cut out big chunks of this, or because we have a better understanding of what we're trying to achieve, we will do goals, path to production. So we don't always have time to do all this except for the real critical things. This is a really solid process for us for very critical components, where we know if we do this wrong, we'll have to live with this for years and then accommodate it from a business perspective, a marketing perspective, and an engineering perspective in ways that feel very uncomfortable.
Cool. Okay. So tell me, when you talk about POCs and prototypes. So as I understand, in this context, you mean like a POC of testing a technology, and not like POC normally is thought about like POC testing actually a product idea in this sense, right? Just to be clear here.
Yeah. Yeah, so...
Or is it both?
Yeah,
Sometimes to combine actually both parts, that you say, okay, I want to test out the product idea, and at the same time you also test the technology like on the go, or are these separate things?
That's a really good clarifying question. A lot of times it's a little bit of both. So there is a product idea that we're matching to a technology, and a lot of times too, it's like the bake-off and the prototype into the POC are all matching to a product idea. And so we're trying to see how these things, the technological implementation meshes to this, whether it's a feature request or overcoming some previous challenge that we have. But it's like and I might be using, well, the way we're using the terminology may not be what's standard, but like it's the bake-off is super rough. The prototype is less rough. Into the POC would be, hey, we're actually trying to prove this out in product or close to product, and like actually simulating and running actual workloads with this idea, meshed with this technology, that we're trying to prove out.
And tell me, so, I mean, as you said yourself, that actually this full process you can just do if you have very, very critical technological parts, right? That you have to, where you have to elaborate, okay, is it the right technology or not, how to go. But I think many of our listeners, when they're in the startup space, then, the projects are maybe not that big, or maybe they are also a little bit more at the beginning of this whole process, then they will not have this possibility. So do you have some advice, like okay, what should they then do? Like if they don't have so much possibilities out there, like to go to this whole elaborate process?
Yeah, so what I would say, startup or very nascent idea or project that you're working on, I would say, still the one thing I would always hold to is try and get as clear as possible on what it is you're trying to accomplish. Like the design part or the refinement of requirements. And a lot of times too, with a new project, you're gonna have to figure it out live. And that's understandable, because your idea, once it becomes realized, turns into something else. But try and get as clear as possible as you can. I would also say try and be as flexible as you can as you're going through this. So to back up to what we do for these critical components, while it is definitely an elaborate process, in all that we are flexible. So what we do is we may see this one technology, and the idea or concept of this technology seems like it's going to make all of our dreams come true, but we are flexible in the sense of once it does not hold up to what we need, we let it go. And so that's the flexible part of this is, or the technology could also lead us.
Yeah, being technology agnostic, right?
Right. It's like, well, this didn't work out, and we learned a lot through that process, so now what? But that's also probably part of the bake-off part, is trying to filter out as much of the things that aren't going to work out. But that's also part of the funnel. But to go back to your question about people that, when you're in the process of something new or you don't have the time, I would come up with requirements, and also make sure that what you're choosing, go with what your team knows. And I know that didn't work out for, the project that you were talking about, where the team knew SQL and it didn't work out for you. But when you're building something new, if you're trying to also train your team on like a new programming language or something new, it's going to take a lot longer. There's going to be a lot more bugs introduced, because like there's a lot of learning that's happening on top of anything else. Maybe if you have the budget, bring in consultants that can help augment that technology, but go with what your team knows. That's what we did when we started Harper DB. Is we knew Node.js, we knew how to scale Node.js really well. There's a great community behind it, and that's what we built our product on, was Node.js, because it was what we knew and what we were good at. But I would say, be flexible, be willing to know that your V1 will probably mostly get rewritten and turn into a V2 at some point, because the first pass is always not the final pass in that. And so I think being flexible in that regard too is just understanding that we tried as much as we could in the time constraints and the resources that we had, and we're going to have to back off. So if you can, with the requirements that you had, there's going to be good enough decisions that are going to be made in that process, and try and make sure with as much foresight as you can while you're, developing, engineering, architecting, all that, to say, are we creating any are we boxing ourselves into a corner here? And making sure that you're not going to be completely boxed out with no upgrade path or change to switching over to something else in that standpoint. But I think what we find to be one of our biggest resources as a team is adaptability and flexibility on our end. And so if you have that from a team perspective, that will make you go a long way. And also the other thing too is mistakes happen, and the thing that we as much as we can we avoid doing is finger pointing and who did this, why. It's more like, okay, we ended up in this place to as a team, what happened and how can we support each other better to move forward.
So I mean, I also like this idea of having to accept that failure is just simply part of the process and has to be part of the process, right? So I mean, no matter how well I'm prepared, there will be always mistakes that happen, and I will have to redo things. But at least if I know what is important, what is not important, I can plan a little bit better beforehand. And then sometimes in the tech world, the people that just get blinded, no, we have to do this. This is the future, and till it's not anymore the future, right? So
right.
Yeah. Well,
I feel like most of my career is back-end development, so this may be a naive statement on my end because I don't do a lot of front-end work, but I do see a lot of articles. It feels like at least a couple times a year there's some new front-end framework that's the new framework, and then there's 3 or 4 months later there's another new front-end framework. And for people whose primary job it is to do UI UX, I'm like, that must be exhausting or super exciting. It's probably a bit of both, because it's there's something new and it offers new adaptability and new functionality, but then because if there's no support behind it anymore, you're now stuck in a framework that no one's maintaining anymore, and then bugs just pile up, and there's no forward movement into the future. And I guess that's to that point is one other thing that we do look at is when we're implementing technologies is how new is it? And what's the community support? If it's an open source project, what's the community support behind it? What's the team behind it? How active are they? Are they engaged? So it's just there's so many factors and threads to pull at for all these things when you're looking at technologies.
And how do you go going forward? So let's say you started the project, you're running, and you're doing it for months or years already. Do you still keep evaluating actually if the technology is still the best, or do you just say, well, we have created already so many lines of codes, now we cannot back off anymore? So how is your perspective there?
Yeah, so one of my roles as CTO is really around technical guidance and making sure that from a technical side, everything rolls up to me. So I am always looking at the core technological components that we're utilizing, and also looking at the business use cases that we have in our pipeline, and evaluating what we have in place. Will this accommodate our current needs and our future needs. And also, what is the internal tech debt that we have? And so one of the things that we're currently doing right now is we're in process around engineering our data replication model. Our current data replication model works great. But for future use cases, we need to adapt forward. We also have some internal tech debt that we need to overcome because our current model is very intricate. We can support it, but we can support it better with a new model. But that means that has meant about a year's worth of work of research and looking at what does it take to pull this out. It's also an opportunity for us to modularize and create better future paths to new replication models that we can like plug and play, things like that.
Yeah. And what would be your general final advice for somebody that has to choose the right technology and is a little bit in this rush kind of situation? What should they look out for?
I think going back to just flexibility is really like thinking back to like our history and other startups I've had. The thing that has served us the best is having a flexible and adaptable mindset. I think also realizing that the decisions you're going to make now, there's a core to it that will stay, and it may not be the core that you think is the most important right now. And I know this is a very general statement, but it's just because everyone's use case is very different. But I think also just realizing that at this time, you're making the best decisions that you can, given what you know right now. Like, you will have made some very good decisions, and you will have made some decisions that you may feel like were terrible. But having that flexibility and adaptability will allow you to let go of the decisions that were bad, just so you can move forward and make better decisions off of what you learned from your V1. But outside of being flexible, just try to define what you're trying to achieve as much as you can up front, doing some design work up front. Like, for example, when we started Harper DB 5 years ago, we had 3 months of runway, and we didn't write a line of code. We started March 1st of 2017. We did not write any code for the first couple weeks because we sat down and did about 2 weeks of planning sessions of like defining a roadmap, defining like how are we going to start laying out this product, like what are the pillars that we need to achieve, what's the order of operations that we're going to start taking these things down. So doing some upfront planning before we wrote any code. And that was really critical. And so we also just like making those decisions as to like, what are we going to do first? What are we going to do later? And setting out a rough timeline for that was really helpful for us, because it also allowed us to create some mental space, because you just look at the whole project and you can get really overwhelmed, like looking at the top of a mountain, and you could be daunted by how am I going to get to the top of this mountain, rather than realizing, well, I'm going to get to that rock first, and then I'm going to get to that tree, and then I'm going to get to that crest, and then I'm going to keep climbing, but I have goals in mind for what's going to make sense, and maybe I'll get to that crest and I'll take a little break, catch my breath a little bit, and see maybe there's a better path at that point.
Yeah.
I really took that analogy really far.
Yeah, well, thinking, just following up on this, I mean, these are complicated and difficult decisions to take, and I think for somebody that's on this road, if possible, to get also an impartial opinion of somebody that is tech-agnostic and can help you also with, can be very useful. Yeah. And I think what is really important here to find somebody that is impartial, because if you go sometimes to, let's say, a tech vendor, like a software agency that is like specialized in a specific technology, they might lead you in a certain direction just because they like exactly like how I had this kind of situation, right? I was with a tech partner and I thought, okay, we have to do it with the SQL database, but actually with the wrong decision. They just didn't know the other kind of possibilities out there, right? So, or they were just not good enough with them. And I mean, you have this everywhere, right? Let's say you make an e-commerce project, right, which is very popular these days. There are so many different possibilities and options out there. And if you go just to a specific vendor, they might just say, okay, yes, WooCommerce is the best way, or Magento is the best way, just because they have done it. Is it really the best for me? Yes, no. Well, so impartial opinions, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that you bring up a really good point. I have a tech advisor that I talk to weekly, and I didn't even think about that.
Great.
And I bounce a lot of ideas off it. Like, yeah, I think like that's a really good point. Is getting everyone is gonna have an opinion. Just some that tech vendor that you were working with, where they definitely were more opinionated than maybe like a friend or an advisor. But that's a really strong point that I didn't even think about, is external inputs, especially in the startup space. There is access to, whether it's your personal network, investors, finding some good tech advisors. Also, my business, I have 2 other business partners that we talk to each other, and Steven, our CEO, is very technical, and so a lot of times I'll bounce things off of him, and because he's focused on the business side, he has that, he's not entrenched in the technology, and so he can look at it more agnostic too, even though it's from the perspective of our company. He still has this outside view of being like, well, that sounds very complicated. Did you think about this? And just, having some perspective, to your point, having some perspective that can break you out of your cycle, right? Better than when I was we use that, and I didn't even think about bringing that up. But thank you for saying that.
No problem. I think to have this advice, definitely helpful. And if you are lucky like you, right, and you have them in your circle, you have the investors, you have your colleagues, this is great, right? But if you don't, then luckily there are some companies also out there that can help you with that are more impartial consultants, let's say. Or we also as Amplifyre, right? I mean, we work with hundreds actually of software companies that are specialized in many different technologies and project types. But when somebody comes to us and says, okay, I want to build an e-commerce project, I would never say to them, well, you have to use this technology or that technology. We would really analyze very deeply, what is the project about? And based on this analysis, we would then say, okay, we think this specific technology or this partner might be useful for you, right? So that's actually the reason why we have built this whole thing also.
Yeah, which is great, because what you're doing then is you're helping that customer define their need, right? I'm sure that's part of the process.
Yeah.
That, Amplifyre does is hey, let's help you break this down, and then we can, because you're saying, you just want them to succeed. You're not trying to promote any specific technology, but you're also giving them an opportunity to create that project definition. What do you need? How, all that stuff, which is awesome. That you can help facilitate them to get to that place and ultimately succeed.
Exactly. This is,
and break through break through all the challenges of making decisions that may not work.
Yeah.
And finding best in breed.
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. And this is why we have built actually this whole business also, because honestly, I had myself experienced in the past where we chose the wrong technology, we chose the wrong partner, we chose the wrong software developers that actually didn't make sense, right? And so we thought about, okay, how can we make this better? How can we help people to make better decisions out there? And I think that the problem is also B2B is very much on trust basis, right? And this is why very often actually the decisions are made just on personal recommendations, because personal recommendations I have the most trust. But the problem is here, well, how many other partners or technologies can this one person know, right? And so so this was the whole idea behind it. Yeah,
right. Yeah, because you're operating from a place of we have broad swath experience with a lot of technologies and a lot of partners, and so having this elevated view really gives a much broader perspective, and seeing where I'm sure also seeing where things have worked out for other customers, pointing to use cases for other customers, and then you can start, because a lot of this too is about repeatability, because a lot of us face the same challenges It's just, like different companies but same challenges a lot of times, and so that's great that like you're able to create that perspective and help facilitate customers to move forward.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insights on the topic. This was very insightful.
Oh yeah, thank you, David. It was great getting to talk with you. I really appreciate you reaching out to me.
And that's it for this episode. And for all the listeners out there, thank you for listening to this podcast. Hope you have now a better idea why to choose which technology at what time. So if you like this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. We have some interesting speakers coming up in the next episodes, so follow Amplifyre on LinkedIn for more updates.